Welcome to the Driveline Baseball Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about long-term player development. So taking, from the moment that you start to get serious, and we can talk about sort of when that should be. But from the moment that you start to get serious, thinking about a college scholarship, thinking about trying to be drafted, this is a question that comes up in the gym, basically with every assessment that we do, some sort of forward mapping of your career as an athlete. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of faulty information, and a lot of assumptions that, things will just break right because of X or Y or Z. And usually, we're having to, have some hard conversations about preparation or what the landscape looks like. And so we thought we'd share a bit of that today on the podcast. I think starting with maybe this overarching sort of theme of just if I am a high school baseball player, 14, 15 years old, and I'm starting to think I want to play at the next level, what are the considerations there? How would you be advising the next 2 to 3 years of that athlete's high school experience?
Yeah, I think very early specialization is probably not good. So 12, 10, well, even worse these days. But there's no benefit from just playing baseball year-round at that age. When you're having hit puberty, there's no testosterone. You're not really growing. It's there's just a limited amount of, motor, control you can develop, and obviously certainly no muscle. So I think you should play many sports.
Isn't there just to push back on that a bit, there are some positive skill adaptations, right?
Yeah,
but
I think
they
so.
Just don't matter.
I don't think they matter that much, and they're dwarfed by any small gains you make when you're very young are kind of dwarfed by the period of time, the limited period of time you have in high school.
You becoming 6'5", 240.
Yeah. As many people have found out in being the best 12-year-old compared to being the best 14-year-old.
Sure.
Many such cases.
So very early specialization.
Yeah, mostly psychologically, I think, is the problem. That's always what I've hammered, is that, if you professionalize baseball at a young age, you learn to dislike your job younger and younger, and that happens with a lot of people. I saw that with my own cousins who played soccer year-round and were pushed and great players, and one of them ended up hating it, pretty quickly into his college career. Mm-hmm. So I'd seen it in my family, but then also that's what happens in baseball too. Yeah, and there's increased risk of injury and all these other terrible things that are absolutely true about early specialization. There's no doubt about it. But the way that I see it is you don't want your kids hating the game. You want them to enjoy practice. So a big part of taking time away from the game is to remind yourself how much you like it. If you go away, if you do without it for 6 weeks, your first session back in the weight room or the batting cage or long toss or whatever it is, you should be like, oh man, I'm so excited to get back out. Whereas if you never have a break, there's a notable big leaguer we worked with who just never liked taking breaks, and who it is. And I just told him, I said, if you just do this is a great way to really hate playing baseball. And that's actually what ended up happening to that player. They had so much. It was so hard for them to go through the motions, or so hard for them to actually show up with training with any sort of zeal or an interest. So then just going through these motions, it doesn't help, especially when you need to get a lot better. That's even someone at the big leagues who needed to get better just to maintain their level because everyone else is getting better at the same time. So imagine if you're 14, 15, 16, and you're starting to hit the phase where you should probably start specializing right around that 15 to 16-year-old range, and you don't have a lot of interest in the game, or you just show up and go through the motions and you don't get better. This is such a quick way to be a pretty mediocre player, even though you specialized early.
I mean, you're saying 14, 15, 16, you should start specializing. Is it really start specializing, or is it you should start training or focusing? Because I think when people think of specialization, they think of the landscape at this present moment for highly specialized 16-year-olds is $20,000 of summer travel and tournament fees, plus a dedicated place that you train at in the winter or the quote unquote off season, and a bunch of showcases. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying begin narrowing in the focus?
Yeah, just narrowing the focus. I forget that there's this whole other realm, sheltered from it. Having worked in pro ball and then here, it's like you forget that there's this other whole beast that you deal with. And it's just about being good enough in training. So it's not about playing travel ball or whatever, really even playing that much. You do get better. The game of baseball you get better by playing that you can never get better at by just training. I definitely believe that. On the other hand, they're not recruiting the best like the best game player that has a really bad skill set. That's just not someone that's getting any scholarship money.
Sure.
So there has to be a balance, and it happens to be that baseball is one of those sports that you can train pretty effectively without others there, without playing games. And that may not be true. That's probably less true about the other sports because they're so dynamic.
Whatever, like soccer, there's like such a relational aspect to the way that you create offense.
Football, basketball,
Sure.
But specifically like pitching, is very much something you can work on at a barn and then show up and then be pretty good at.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not advocating for that. I think playing games has value in and of itself. But it's not necessarily about you do want to play the best competition. Sometimes that means you have to pay to play on these select teams or whatever. That is true. There's no getting around that. But it's really about calibrating how good you are compared to those people. There's no inherent super benefit from playing on these like crazy teams,
Meaning there's no inherent benefit to like getting skills or like acquiring tools.
Yeah, or just like you do want to play against the best people because you do want to be like, oh, okay, like that's what that's like. That sucks playing against a guy that good, But it doesn't have to be your whole life, You do need to be training your skills to get to that level. And there's a finite amount of training economy and also just time in your life to do it. So then as you get to be 15 and 16, what I mean by specialization is, look, you can probably play 2 sports in high school, maybe even 3, but one of them has to be your focus. Like this has to be what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to focus on. And this is how I'm going to like really push to play in college and to play beyond that. And even people like Randy Moss, which is one of my favorite stories. It's like,
Randy Moss.
This is such a great story. Well, Jason Williams is one of my favorite basketball players, and he had a great interview.
Didn't they go to high school together or something?
Yeah, in a town of 8,000 people. It's wild. And Jason Williams and Randy Moss both won Player of the Year in their respective sports. It's just that Jason won it in football and Randy won it in basketball, which is one of my favorite stats.
Really?
Yeah, Randy was Jason even says, like, he's one of the greatest, like, how do you define athleticism? And Steven Jackson was just asking him. He's like, is he one of the best basketball players, football players you've ever been around? And Jason's like, no, he's the best athlete. He's like, because what is athleticism? You run faster, jump higher, throw a baseball further. He's like, and Jason was like, he could kick in the NFL today. He's like, he was our punter, and he was probably a better punter than he was a wide receiver on the high school team. He's like, Randy can kick the shit out of a ball. Like, so he kicked kickoffs, punts. He never came off the field. Kickoffs, free safety, wide receiver, punter. But like, we're like, oh, he never came off the field. It's like, but no, he did. He kicked also. Like, he was probably our better kicker, And so then, but when I tell the story, it's funny. You should look it up on YouTube. But even better about that is Randy played in one of these select tournaments, big tournaments, and he played with Jason. And they played the big AAU tournament. And he like beat someone, laid it high off the glass, pretty normal move, great move, and it just got clean off the glass, just like some guy went up there and just took it. And Randy's like, what? There's like players this good? Mm-hmm. And just imagine one of the greatest athletes in American sports ever getting dominated. And I think what he concluded is like, well, there just must be like hundreds of these people that are like this good in basketball. Yeah. So I guess I'll just focus on football. Mm-hmm. When the guy that did it was Kevin Garnett. So it's like, all right, well, that's like probably like one of the 5 best high school players ever. 5 is like really generous. It's probably, probably 3,
Sneaky good as a pro too.
Right, but it's dude, in high school it was a joke how good he was. Yeah. But if you're Randy and you grew up in a small town in West Virginia and this guy in Indianapolis does it, you're just like, there got to be like 100 of them, right? It turns out no. But it's very funny, then Randy specialized in football and then became who he is. So even for an athlete that great who could do anything and could have played professional anything, could have played pro baseball, it doesn't matter, right? Like even he had to make a decision, at some point, and then went to Marshall and played, and became who he is, one of the greatest receivers of all time, if not the greatest. So at some point you do have to pick a choice, and because if you're an elite athlete like a Joe Mauer, Carl Crawford, Randy Moss, whatever, sure, you can play all these sports, and you're great in all of them, but it's because you're genetically gifted. If you're an average player, you got to kind of focus. So that doesn't mean paying $20,000 and having your parents drive you all over, but it's like, it means that you got to get in the gym. You look at the average. I think someone posted like the SEC, because now that they're dominating, and we'll get into that later about college scholarships. But the average freshman that plays, first of all, almost no freshmen play now due to NIL and scholarships. And
Yeah, it was wild at the College World Series
right.
to see that.
But when they do play, the freshmen are like, they're so good. It's like they're so good. Because it's not just like, oh, the freshman has to be better. The coach has to trust that the freshman isn't going to do something stupid in the College World Series, which is hard to trust an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old. So not only is he physically obviously much more dominant than the sophomore or the junior, he's mentally he must be prepared, because the college coach at the World Series isn't going to risk some nonsense. Maybe at like a other school but in the College World Series, it's pretty clear that the freshman must be a good baseball player, must have a good mind, and then is obviously very physically dominant. So,
but then isn't that the argument for going to get your brains beaten in by whatever the most elite travel competition is that you could possibly imagine?
I think the college fall season has a good way of doing that to them. So maybe not.
Well, yeah, but then you're out of spot, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
if you learn November 15th, that's it.
Sure, but I don't think you're playing against Jack Caglione in the summer championship, whatever. It's like the quality of player you play in the college is they're so much older, so you're not going to experience that in the summer in select ball.
Sure.
Plus there's just a huge team aspect. I mean, Max Gordon, former employee, talks a lot about it when he went to Oregon State. He wasn't ready to contribute. He was just not. He needed to learn how to, to be not to be a good teammate. He was obviously always a good teammate, but how to take advantage of the limited opportunities you do get, because he was a walk-on player, and you're not going to get a lot of opportunities playing, especially then during Oregon State. Almost never, but definitely not then when he played either. He was playing on those really good teams. And he got his few opportunities, and he wasn't ready. And those failures are themselves, educational. So I think, I don't think anything prepares you for playing at that high level. It helps, but you just got to go. And being training, being the best athlete. And if you show up as a freshman and you're the strongest and the fastest and have some of the best tools, that alone builds confidence. The coaches are just going to give you more chances.
I mean, give you more chances, but also you have a higher likelihood of being able to stick versus being able to just finesse it as sort of a super skilled type.
Yeah, and you got to see it as a long journey. And they do that, I think, fairly effectively in professional baseball when they sign a 16-year-old Latin kid or an 18-year-old high school kid. They realize that it's going to be several years before this player is an impact player at the big league level, whether they're one at all. But yet we don't have that same attitude when you're 15 in high school. So you have to realize it's if you want to play in the big leagues, then this is truly an 8 to 10 year journey starting now. So you can't really be focused on what's going to happen over the next couple of years.
So
that's hard.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's hard getting 15-year-olds to focus on anything. Come watch practice at night.
Yeah, I mean, if you're 16 and you're not focused on this, then you're just not a big leaguer, and that's okay. If you're oh, I want to do other things or whatever, it's that's fine, but they don't do that. Good big league, that.
Yeah, I mean,
those guys don't do that, and that's okay. You just got to admit that, but so no amount of that is going to build it. But I do think a good way to be someone that's unfocused at 16 is to at 11 be pressed into playing 200 games a year and whatever. That's a great way to not be focused later, because then you forget what's actually important.
That's 100% true. I think the thing that is the whatever the potential mental block or the thing to try to work through is it's extremely likely that if you are listening to the podcast or whatever, and you're not just sitting there at 17 years old being I play in the largest division of high school competition in the state. I am all region in 2, 3, 4 sports or whatever, and clearly dominate, or at least am extremely talented in all those things. Then it's just you probably aren't sitting there with the base underlying athleticism to just not focus and be a big leaguer, because there are definitely big leaguers who just are kind of big leaguers. They've just never not been good at the sport, despite working an average to below average amount at it. That's a thing.
It's probably the majority of the big leaguers like that.
Yeah, which I think is a frustrating thing to think about, because then not only as a 15-year-old who is thinking about it from the standpoint of okay, maybe I don't have the physical gifts of players X, Y, and Z who I know of as like my local reference points, but I definitely can outwork them. Like that is a definite type. I mean, we see a ton of them. We've helped a lot of them. The challenge I think for that person is like there's 1,200 spots to be a big leaguer. 600, 700 of them are reserved for players that are not working hard. They just are genetically big leaguers, and there isn't really much that you can do about the fact that you drew the short straw on the genetic lottery. You're just competing for a smaller slice of the pie, and so that does mean that there. But what I think is also true is that the unfair advantage is thinking across multiple years.
Yeah.
Like, because much of the sport is focused like year to year, level to level. It's like a Super Mario game. It's like, okay, I got from level 1 to level 2. And you're not thinking about like, okay, at level 1, I need to develop skills that I can deploy at level 3 and 4, or like athletic traits or any of these other things.
Yeah, it's doesn't come naturally. I think having your parents or uncles that played in the big leagues or were good athletes. Of course you get the genetics, right? That's typically what happens. But of course, the player I always bring up is Carson Spires, and it must have been that his family, and he played for one of the most legendary, difficult coaches to play for, or he was recruited by Jack Leggett. He didn't play for him, but his whole family played for Leggett. So there must have been like a good. I never talked to Carson about this, but there must be like this long-term understanding of how it's going to be, because Carson was undersized and a walk-on at Clemson, and was a good reliever at Clemson. Great, and then to be a starter in the big leagues after a non-drafted free agency, that's a long journey that didn't start. That started well before I met him. So he had the right mentality long before that, and so being instilled by your parents and your uncle who played 13 years in the big leagues has to have helped. You get the right perspective on it, and then when you look back at people's careers, I mean, like Tyler Matzik would be one of best, like anointed to be the greatest player, best left-handed pitcher in high school. Orange Lutheran, I think probably threw a couple no-hitters, won the SIF championship, like unbelievable player in high school, one of the best lefties since Scott Kazmir probably in high school. And then drafted, arguably whatever happened, whether he developed the yips or like the organization gave it to him, and I'm sure it's a little bit of both, leading to a surgery. And then people just forget about Matzik. They're just like, oh, yeah, he was that gifted guy that did weird wrist weight stuff in high school, because he did. And then was out of baseball because, it's another first rounder that the Rockies draft and get no value out of. Great. And it's forgotten. But Tyler continued to play. He played 2 years in indie ball on an upstart indie ball team that was, I think, like 80% Taiwanese. Something like that. Like the Texas Texas Air Hogs. Yeah. It was the CPBL expansion team or like whatever. Like, so he played on a team that largely didn't speak English. Terrible team. Lose 100 games a year. And Tyler had to play 2 years there. 2 full years of indie ball, like walking like 14 guys per night, going through his thing. Get a chance at the Diamondbacks, released. Get a chance at the Mariners in camp, released. Get like all these other chances to the point where like, oh, now Tyler won a World Series and was their best reliever in the pen. And it's like, did Tyler ever? It's like, oh, that's such a great story or whatever. But it's like that story is like 12 years long. To the point where Tyler's recovering from Tommy John again right now. Or again, maybe his first surgery. I don't know, but he's recovering from surgery right now, and he's obviously a friend of the program and trained here. And once you understand like what Tyler battled through, it's like, but how do you give that perspective to someone who's Tyler Matzik when he's 16 and the greatest pitcher on earth? But there is a toughness to that, and Tyler's always been that way. So it is. You would think like, oh, Tyler was destined to be a big leaguer. Yeah. It's like, but also if you looked in 4 years after he was drafted, he'd be like, oh, he'd been destined to sell insurance too. I think so. There has to be both. And then when someone is the greatest genetically gifted and works very hard, then that's what Bryce Harper looks like. Like that's the scary thing. Like that's how good someone can be. Someone like Robert Stock, who was an elite and a great and a success and a big leaguer by any number. A friend of ours as well. It's amazing to watch that Robert at his age is still throwing upper 90s and still focused and still trying to be the best big leaguer he can be while he plays while he plays in international leagues. And it's like that's it's really a testament to just how crazy it is to be a big leaguer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also demonstrates that, like, if you rewind the clock to some of those players at 14, 15, 16, like, if you widen the lens and you think about like what makes this player, the best possible version of a baseball player that they could be, or at least like have a career that extends as long as they have interest, which I think is the most anybody could ask for. Then what you're really talking about is like building up the underlying skill set, getting exposure to being able to play the game, and then also finding coaches who will like teach you how to play it well, so that you do start to get some of the like gamesmanship elements of just like playing the sport specifically. And there's this huge other component of just like character building or toughness building that either is inherent to your family situation from just like growing up, or sort of like needs to be instilled like exogenously. And I think, there's different paths to learning all that stuff. There's not like one true way, but I think, a big dosage of that like 14 to 16 experience is like, number one, if you are not just gifted to the point where like most of the players that we've mentioned right now, it's like you'll know if you're one of them because you're 15 years old and people have already started talking to you about like being a first round draft pick. Like they're not talking to you about like, yeah, can you come to my camp or whatever, my college camp.
Yeah, they don't talk to you about coming to camp because they realize it's a waste of time.
That's right.
It's like
so, but like that's those are some signals, and like if that's not happening to you, that's fine. It just means that you've got to find another way through the door. Like it's not just going to happen, and part of that is like you've got to really focus and you've got to play a longer term game, which means like for some people it means taking the JUCO route, or going to a smaller school and then transferring to a bigger school when you have the skills, or getting drafted out of said smaller school and like grinding it out.
Yeah, the process begins anew. College, minor league ball, it just sucks. It's just terrible at every level. The jump of difficulty is just so huge. So you got to be good with that. Like you got to be good with just getting dominated. It's why it's important to like accept training to failure at a young age. Like being able to, I think it's one of the best things you can do if you're a parent, you're listening to this, or a coach, instilling that competitive environment is huge. And you hear that from the big leaguers all the time, that their parents like maybe not press them. Often they didn't, but they didn't throw them soft toss or tee work. And I talked to Bazana for a long time about that, Travis Bazana, about that. And, he was instilled from a young age to like train to failure, hit off machines, that kind of thing, so you have to, it sucks going to work and training to failure, it's like, it's terrible. And it never gets better. You never enjoy it. You can't, it's by definition. It's like anyone who says that is lying to you. It's just like, being told you're wrong by an employee below us. That happens to you and I all the time. It's what we want. It's good for the business, what we want. But then in the moment, it sucks. To this day, it sucks to be told,
Yeah.
Right? Because
yeah.
it's supposed to. It's never supposed to be good. So how do you just understand that, like, in the moment, it is what it is, and then long term, you're like, okay, that's good. I'm happy the employee did that. And, it is all that matters is that Driveline gets better. For us, we're trying to build, we've been doing this 10, 15, we've been doing it for 30 years. You know how I am with time. I have no idea anymore. But it's just like, it's the never ending thing of we're going to build this business. We have a clear path to where it's going to be. And that's only been true for maybe 5 years or so. But it's like we have a clear path on where we're trying to get it, and that's all that matters to you and I and to people at Driveline, and we've communicated that message. But that took us both you and I a long time to get to that thing. So I try to remember that even for the first like 5 to 7 years we were in this business, we really had no idea what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's like for them, it's like how do you just keep instilling that and repeating messages and getting there, and then eventually we got on that, and now it's our job to communicate to that and the employees. And just like you as a parent or a coach, you need to communicate that it's a game of failure, and you can't just say that. You got to give them an environment to fail in, and they got to feel safe in it. They're not going to feel happy. It's okay.
Yeah.
But it's like, can they feel safe in doing it and come back to work the next day and be slightly demoralized? That's normal. But how do you just teach them that that's part of the whole process?
I think it becomes hard to, one of the things that is always impressive to me is when somebody makes it onto the big league stage, or even like has a very successful collegiate career, and come to find out that it's like mom or dad who has been the driving force behind like coaching and pushing them, largely because like unless that person is also a big leaguer or has like high level athletic experience, that's that's a nearly impossible thing to try to navigate.
Yeah.
You know, like it's probably hard enough for the Holiday brothers to be as good as they are.
Yeah, no kidding.
With their dad being like
one of the greatest.
One of the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
You know, like that's no easy feat to then just have it be like, oh yeah, my dad isn't Matt Holiday. He's Matt Halliday, like insurance rep
Right.
at Geico or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay. So at that point, like you either need to luck into or go seek out like people who will help like guide you on this journey, or at least level set to like, hey, this is truly where you are right now, and here's what's possible. You know, if you can focus, but realistically, like it's probably helpful to know at 15 or 16 that like you can control a lot of your destiny, but then where the sorting hat sort of dumps you out in the landscape of collegiate baseball, like can be frustrating, but is also just like a part of the journey if you still like love the sport. If you aren't interested in the sport and you don't really love it and you're just like, oh, I want to go play D1 because like that's what my ego tells me that I want to do, or you know, that's just like a dream that I had, but I don't actually like the game part, or I don't like the practice or the training, then like longevity in the sport is going to be difficult to sustain unless you are like truly gifted. Like, and that's the trade-off is like seemingly, you know, from all accounts and from potentially his own mouth, like Anthony Rendon does not like the sport of baseball all that much, and nonetheless is like, you know, one of the greater guys to have ever done it, to the point where he's earned himself like a significantly large contract and played in the College World Series and all that stuff. Like that's an insanely successful baseball career from someone who may or may not have fallen out of love with the sport at some point. And like, if you aren't him, you know, then you got to love it, and you got to be able to like really set the, you know, find ways to set yourself up to like brick by brick, like build like workout after workout, the consistency to like develop yourself into whatever your 95th percentile outcome is.
I think what parents and kids are probably too young to understand this or to appreciate it, but what parents and coaches are scared of, and I think they should be, it's totally normal, is that like, is what we're doing good? You know, does it help accomplish their goals?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And there was no right way. You had to pay an expert or listen to somebody. And when you're Carson Spires and your uncle played 13 years on the show, and your dad is one of the most legendary players at Clemson in multiple sports, you know, like they got a good sense for what was. They may not know the particulars. I'm not saying they don't, but like they may not know the particulars. But they know the day in and day out what it means to be a shortstop in the big leagues for over a decade. I mean, that you don't do it on accident. You don't do it on skill alone, right? Billy Spires had a process, and maybe didn't always have it, but he developed it over time, right? And played on some great teams. And you learn what it means to work, and you learn what it rhymes with. So if your kid's doing something stupid or like it doesn't make sense, you know, well, maybe not that, right? And it's just like, oh, how does it jive with everyday life as preparing? You know, so that's nice. But if you're not, and you worked in insurance, how do you know what's good? And I think technology is the great equalizer there. Like it's that's why it's so great. It's why it's so emasculating too, to put on a blast sensor and swing and then compare it to Stanton. It's like, oh my God, like is that much tougher? You know? But that's a good thing. Like we used to not know. Oh, Stanton has like the best bat speed in baseball. Or I think we all generally know that. But how much better is he than how much better is he than an average hitter? I don't know. You know, and how much better is an average hitter than the worst hitter? And how much is better is the worst hitter than me? It's very hard to know, you know. But now with TrackMan and Blast and things that are just coming down in price, and HitTrax and Repsodo and all these other tools that are coming out, you can know these things. So I think it's such a huge thing to be able to sign up for, and it's just going down in cost every day. You know, that's what we're trying to drive the cost down to zero. You know, like that's our goal for training, and cheap wearables and things that can measure all these things and get a one-page report, like the smart reports we're rolling out and all the other products are purely geared for a low-cost solution that you can check every single day, that you get actionable information, and it's just literally one or two things. This is like, you're on pace, you're not on pace.
Yeah.
And there's other stuff too, but like that alone is like, and you could have 95% confidence that Driveline that these are not the things, because when Bazzana went 1-1, it's a credit to him for sure. But like all of his batted ball metrics, once Twitter and social media started picking it up and getting it from it, it's like this guy, like all of his batted ball metrics like correspond with like what big leaguers do. And it's like, do you think it happened on accident?
Yeah,
it's like
right.
Travis, like he talks about it all the time. It's like, dude, we knew what teams draft for. We know what succeeds in the big leagues. This is what we're going to do. And your profile can do these things, so we're going to do these things. Like you can pull the ball in the air, so we are going to lean on that. Now, if you couldn't, and there are other things he was good at, there's other ways to be a great big leaguer.
There's other ways to
but
be a
it's
big
like
leaguer.
we know that those quantitative teams, fortunately at the top of the draft, there were a couple teams picking like that prioritize that. Cleveland's one, Cincinnati's another.
Yeah.
That they like these things. And so it's like, look, we're going to put him in a position, and it's why we have such a good relationship with agents and agencies, because they know that we understand the game and understand talent development. But it's not like you and I have an innate knowledge of that. We derived it through technology, through studying the game, through that, and then it gives parents ultimate confidence that their money and their time, it's not, is spent wisely with an organization that understands what the end product should look like and how to get there. And I think that's what Driveline offers, and like that's my advertisement for this. But more importantly, it's I think there's a couple organizations that do a good job of that, and they understand that that's the path, right? Because it's not just baseball. This is many other things. Like a lot of things is like, this is what you got to do to be a successful broadcaster. This is what you got to do this, and to be a successful electrician. I think in the guilds do a great job of this. Like when my father was an electrician, he had to do this,
Yep.
do this. If you're a welder, you have to do this. Well, it has to be like this. They do such a good job of where you are today, where you got to be later,
Yep.
and whatever. And so this is a thousands of year old problem. That finally in baseball with technology, we're able to solve in a systematic way, just like the guilds have too. They do a good job of that.
Yeah, I think the technology being the equalizer is I think what it does is it allows someone to put their faith in that the repetitions away from the field are mattering. Like, because the easiest thing to do is to just be like, okay, my son's 12, he loves baseball, let's play a lot of baseball. Okay, now he's 15, he's better at baseball, because most 15-year-olds are better than they were at 12. Great, like, here we go, like, more games, and then all of a sudden it's like, the field changes, the talent pool changes, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, God, like, I'm getting wrecked here. Luckily, all these, a lot of the slope of how the talent pool changes is measurable. Like, you can just go look at, this is what D1 hitters, loosely are able to do in terms of like how fast they swing, what sorts of, like, where they make contact, where the ball goes, how fast it goes. This is what they pitch at. This is their command. Like, these things are all measurable. And so you can turn around and reverse engineer that. But that truly means like trusting a longer form process. And then it also means, having some idea that like the work that I'm doing is going to show up at some future point. Like, I'll be able to lean on that. And that was harder to do 10, 15 years ago, and is easier to do now because, like in our smart report is just like, hey, you threw your plyo balls this today. Here's your goal expected velocity. Here's how much, that has changed based off of today's work. It's just like brick by brick, like 0.1 mile per hour by 0.1 mile per hour. Like, did you stay within the healthy range of throwing? Are you continuing to push speeds in this other way? And that's the way to do sort of like data-driven, risk-reward based training, is to be like, hey, look, like if you have large dreams and you are not, just clearly on the path to achieving them with no outside intervention, then you have to take some level of risk to like push yourself.
Yep. Yeah, and that leads into the next topic, the college scholarships.
That's the challenge, is that like, especially for players that are like the players that are at present day, 14, 15, 16, are going to be walking into a collegiate environment that is wildly different than anything that we have that has ever existed.
Yeah, and it's going to be even more different with the 30 unlimited scholarships now. Right?
34 scholarships, like an
30 spots, right? They cut the roster spots, right?
What's that?
They cut the roster spots, right? So
Yeah.
you get the unlimited scholarships, but you get 6 fewer slots.
Yeah, and
those
those things are going to trickle down.
Huge.
It's like,
it's huge.
you know,
6 times the number of D1 colleges.
Well, there's 240-ish D1 colleges,
Sure.
so call it
1,200
1,500 players.
Sure, yeah. Can't even round down, but yeah, that's a lot.
1,500 players at the D1 level, you know, they get pushed down into D2, D3, junior college.
Yep.
You know, so there's another 1,600 colleges that are not D1. So call that like one per college, basically. Like, okay, now your best guy has just become your second best guy, or your, you know, your top 3 has changed or whatever. And then that's just 1,500. That's one slot per team that's not available to a high school kid coming in. But the same number of kids are matriculating into the game. And it's just, there's no possible way that it's not going to be more competitive. And with the draft compressing further, so there's 20 draft slots.
It's the most it's going to be.
Yeah.
We're not going to have more draft slots.
There's 160 minor league slots.
Also the most it's going to be.
Yep. Like, guys are going to stay in college for longer.
Then let's talk about international draft is coming.
Sure.
So then if you don't get drafted, what is it you work out? Like, a lot of those kids are going to go to school. A lot of those Dominicans they're already doing that, but now it's going to be even more.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, if you're not J2 signee and you're not going to sign for big money or even some money, like normally like those pitchers, they don't sign at 16 or whatever you want to call it, and then they stick around. And a lot of pitchers, J2, June 2nd as they used to call it, or July 2nd, and now it's kind of whatever now, but it's still the slang. Pitchers are often being signed at 18 years old. They just stay in the Dominican train and they are good enough and then sign as their international free agent and then get maybe $100,000 to $200,000.
Yep.
It's pretty good. With the international draft, that's done. We're not doing that. It's going to be, why stick around then? You know, I don't know how it's going to roll out, but like if I'm 16, 17 now, if I'm, you know, a lot of the parents are prioritizing English. The support in the Dominican has gotten so much better. English speaking countrywide has gotten a lot better. The focus on that has been huge. You know, going to school and staying in school has become a big thing in the Dominican now. You know, so then those kids are going to get GEDs, high school diplomas, or whatever. They're going to qualify for NCAA instead of just if they go to JUCO, which is what they normally do. I'm not doubting that at all. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, but a lot of them have to because they don't have high school. They don't qualify. They're not NCAA qualifier.
Yep.
You know, but in the future, they probably will be. You know, okay, I'm not going to be a likely J2. I'm 15. Well, better make sure I get my GED within 2 years. And they're really driven. They speak good English, whatever. And then you're going to run into players like Ellie De La Cruz. You know, that kid, in another world, he probably does go to college. How nuts is that? Imagine Ellie De La Cruz would be like a junior in high school, college now or something like that, because he signed for $50,000, $20,000. He was a whatever. So if he's not that good, he doesn't get drafted, right? He goes and plays at, I don't know, some school season, and he plays at like Iowa or something. And could
probably not Iowa, dude. Like that's the thing.
No,
like,
I know.
It's probably going to be like probably not Iowa. Probably like
Florida International,
Iowa Western.
Yeah, or like Florida International. Like imagine he goes to a 4-year school. I'm thinking like because he's smart. You know, within what he spoke like almost no English, and within a year and a half, he's perfectly fluent in English. That's the thing about Elliot is like he's not just a great ball player and he isn't a great person. He's very smart. Like, he's very intelligent. Mm-hmm. You know, so then imagine him getting 3-point whatever in school, playing shortstop for Clemson. Like that would be unbelievable.
Sure.
You know, and that's going to happen. That's going to happen. You know, like in a few 20 years from now, like the next Elliot De La Cruz may go to college instead because he's not going to sign for $20,000. Not only does he not want the money, but that's not even going to be an option anymore. You know, so now when the international draft comes, now it compresses college even further. You know, that's coming.
And there's all the players in Japan.
Well, yeah, that's right. Good point. Rintaro Sasaki, right?
Yeah.
We're going to start. That's going to. I don't know how common that's going to be, but it's got to be more than 0. So you know,
if
he's taking a spot at Stanford and not just taking a spot, it looks like he's going to play every day. It looks pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So it's not just taking a roster spot, which is bad enough, you know. Like if you're, but now he's going to play every day, and it's like, dang man,
playing every day is
sure maybe he's the best high school player, but but he might not be. So
it's
like
worse for the U.S. born high school player because it's like, okay, you know, this already happens in basketball to some degree.
Oh no,
like,
100%. Yeah.
Where it's like, look, you know, Gonzaga, you know, during their stretch always had some 7'3" like Eastern European dude.
Respect Sabonis, man.
Yeah. University of Arizona, same thing. It's just like So, okay, they're already going across the pond.
Olympic hero Chase Budinger, shout out U of A. Yeah, I know.
But like there's already these dynamics at play. To say nothing of like the lesser sports, where like the Olympics is on right now, and you're like, oh yeah, this guy Leon Marchand from France is winning gold medal after gold medal. Like, what's his deal? Like, he just swims in a pool in France? No, he's like at ASU or something.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, so all these other sports are already like
golf.
Yeah, taking the best of the international talent, matriculating them into the university system, and then graduating them into the professional level. Yeah. Baseball is not really doing that at any sort of level internationally, with the possible exception of like a handful of Australians.
Yeah, Australia, be the biggest one.
But, that's gonna happen probably faster than we expect, especially if, like, with an international draft, the mechanics of getting paid to play baseball change materially.
Yeah, and effectively
especially
Australia
with the
kind
NIL stuff,
yeah,
too.
and Australia forces it because they don't let kids play full-time in professional baseball unless they get their high school diploma. So a lot of them are dissuaded from signing as J2 anyway. Like the Curtis Meads of the world, sure. But like the Bazanas, who's only going to get 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever, it's like, he still can't even play full-time in America due to like restrictions. Like, so that's why they're already starting to push into college. Plus, well, obviously, we know the Australian leadership. That's what they want too.
Sure.
But the government, they like basically don't let the kids, which is a good rule, I think. So like de facto, we already see what can happen. Now Bazana's 1-1, so imagine what's going to happen in Australia. And then that type of thing is going to happen in the Dominican. And Australia is, what, the 5th largest country that has baseball people, or 6th or something like that. So then imagine the ones ahead of it. It's like Korea. When I was at the World Golf Science thing in 2019 or whatever, they were just telling me, or 2021, whatever it is. Like I talked to the Oklahoma State coach about golf, just about like NIL and how it has impacted his. He's like, yeah, it's a thing. He's like, but really international recruiting. He's like, over half of our incoming class is foreign born.
Yeah.
One from, and all over, like one Korea, one Japan.
Yeah.
One Norway. It's like all over the place.
Yeah.
And
I think
so. The fact that it hasn't happened in baseball yet, it doesn't mean that won't.
Well, but part of the whatever the rationale is like, okay, you could be the greatest baseball player in the world, like you getting what 50% scholarship to like why is that good? And somebody's going to be able to make you whole or whatever. Like this is not a discussion of like the discrete finances of how to do this, but the reality is that the big league money was always better.
Yes, and
with NIL plus a full college scholarship now, the big league money is not better.
Yep.
Like for a huge slice of players who are going like 5th to like premier undrafted signee, like and then for like the middle market to the bottom market of every international of every international class. So like all those players come into college now, and it's just like, man, the constrictions and you've got the ability to stretch it out even further to take like a grad year or these other things. So now all of a sudden, like the best players can just be rostered for far longer. Meanwhile, there's a bunch more international demand. And then just this idea of like, oh yeah, I play for the like elite Toon Squad, traveling team or whatever, and I'm just going to like roll into a D1 place and dominate. It's like you're dealing with 22-year-olds that have been, killing international competition for 4 years. Like, I don't think so, man. Like, you're going to have to be really, really good. And then that just means that the path has become even more convoluted for you because the, and coaches have started going on record to say this, which is basically like at the very tip of the spear, like P4 college baseball, but even specifically like ACC, SEC, you are just assembling the Avengers year after year after year. Like there's no longer this thing of like, like we really love Timmy and we're going to get Timmy in and we're going to get him on a weight program for 2 years. And then, look at how we've done this for all these other players. That's not going to be a thing anymore.
It's just crazy and these coaches do it. They a lot of it is that I'm not saying they say it. I'm not trying to like their gas them. They're just trying to be fair to these 18-year-old kids.
100%, yeah, 100%.
And they're not saying that. Maybe some say it, but I'll say it for them. It's like they're just being fair. Like, what's the point of bringing an 18-year-old that's 170 pounds and the most skilled player, one Gatorade Player of the Year in his state, but do you compete with 20-year-old transfers? It's just like it's not fair. It's not fair for that kid, you know.
Yeah.
And now maybe you're Carson Spears, maybe you're Carson Spires, and like your whole family played for Clemson, so that's just how it's going to be. Okay, well then Leggett can understand that, and Monty Lee can understand that, Bakich can understand that. Okay, we'll take him, you know. But then he knows what the deal is, you know. But then the average 18-year-old, like they're not ready for that. They don't know what is next. You know, competing with it used to be just junior college. You would compete with transfers at the break, and now it's every
everybody.
school.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
so
because
it's like you want to have the best product. You want to do the recruiting and the transfers and whatever. Yes, you do want to do that if you're the coach. You want to put the best product, but it's also about being fair to the transfers that you have in and fair to the kids that you have on campus. You can't lie to them, you know, and they don't. By and large, we know tons of college coaches, and they're almost always very truthful with their players, you know, and it's just hard. Sometimes the kids don't want to hear it, you know. Well, how can you understand? How can you understand what it's like to play against Jack Caglione in college?
Well, and also like, you know, it's just like, okay, I've been like a part of these teams that roll into these like big national events and dominate, and I'm the Maryland Gatorade Player of the Year or whatever. And so like, yeah, you tell me that I'm gonna like come on campus and sit for 2 years, but like,
you can't even say
probably
that
not,
because they won't show up. But even if you do have the balls to say it, they won't agree. You know.
Yeah. But it's like, okay, so even if you are theoretically signing up for that,
right,
then the lived reality of it is like is so much worse.
Yeah.
Because like, and this is a thing, you know, even when we have players who are like 17, 23, you know, years old, and you're like, okay, look, like, this is what 2 years of like really hard training is going to look like for you in order to achieve this thing that you say that you want to achieve. There's almost always some moment in time in the first 90 days where they're just like, Jesus, this is far different than I was expecting. Because it's easy to be like, yeah, I got now's the day. Yep. I'm committing. Like, we're doing this. You know, like I'm gonna beat these guys out. And then it's like, yeah, probably not. You know, and to be faced with that reality,
speech, you know,
to be faced with that reality is difficult to grapple with, which is why, like, you know, in the landscape, almost the best possible thing to be developing is like probably three things: love of baseball.
Yeah,
like,
love it.
If you like it, the work becomes easier, and it does at some point become a lot of work for these guys that are not just like, you know, kissed with the big league skills. The second is probably some level of gamesmanship, or the ability to just like win games. Like some level of like, I know how to navigate a baseball game. I can make smart plays. Like that's a muscle that, if you see the field, is likely to earn you another look, assuming you don't get your absolute doors blown off. But like, if you don't have that, but you have the tools, like, it's a real easy hook for a coach, because, you know, their career, their job is on the line. They're not trying to put out like a bad product. And if you're just like, you know, making bad throws or making terrible base running decisions, like, you're not going to get the opportunity to like hit bombs. You know, and then the last thing is like, you have to have physical skills good enough to play at the level that you're trying to play at least average to above average.
Yep.
If you're slightly below average, like, that's playable, but it's far harder. And if you spent some amount of time focusing on it, it's, of the three, it's the piece that's probably most easily coachable or trainable in a small window of time.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to be like, all right, 15-day boot camp for you to love baseball again.
Right, yeah, exactly.
We're going to watch Major League and
True Grit.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Just like that's there's no way to hack a lot of that. Whereas like, yeah, you can probably,
yeah, and it still sucks.
You know, over 90 to 360 days, you can probably become more athletic. You know, whatever it is that the blocker is.
Yeah, the adversity part is the idea of it, and when you watch Hollywood movies or whatever, is like, oh, of course, but then the lived experience is terrible. But then think about the top 3 picks of the draft, right? Like, it's so far removed. Like, Travis Bazana, not major J2 signee out of Australia.
Yeah.
Actively dissuaded not to play at a large Division I school. Then was okay. Good. He was good. And then became the 1-1. So there's was not anointed as a kid. Had to do that. Okay, that's the 1-1 pick. Okay, that still seems pretty simple. Okay, well the 1-2 pick goes to Tennessee. Chase Burns. Effectively benched. Told he can't be a starter. By Vitello.
Yep.
Has to make the very difficult decision to transfer to a quote unquote lesser baseball school, to Wake Forest. Because he believed in the development. I'm not, I don't know all Chase's reasons, but I'm sure that the pitch lab and the reputation for developing great pitchers, which is well earned there, played a big role in Chase's decision. Then he went and had to transfer and then earn the respect of Coach Walter, who was not an easy man to impress, as a guy I know pretty well, and Brady Kirkpatrick there, or sorry, Kirkpatrick, Duke, my mistake, apologize. But just of the people and the long legacy like Matt Hobbs and the others have left there, how difficult it is to become the starter there. It's not like Chase went in and Walter was like, oh, yeah, you're going to start on Friday. We both know Walter pretty well,
Sure.
and then to then become the second overall pick. But that's huge adversity to leave what was going to be the college national champion in Tennessee to do that, to Condon, who was redshirted or almost redshirted his freshman year, or either was redshirted or didn't play his freshman year.
Yep.
It's like, so these are the 3 best players in the draft, and all of them dealt with something that would have been one of the worst things that a college player would deal with. Charlie's like, I'll go to UGA, doesn't play freshman year, right? Then is the 3rd overall pick, right?
Yeah.
And it's like these are all minor things. So then if that's the 3 best players and they all deal with something, the last thing you want to do is you don't want to transfer. Like, Chase doesn't want to transfer. I'm sure he didn't, but
Sure.
he just had to do what was best for his career,
Yep.
And so like those are difficult things, and that's like as good as it's going to get, right? Like, much more likely is you'll transfer twice, you'll be cut, right? You won't make this team, right? Like, and now imagine what the people in the 5th round and the 10th round and the 20th round are dealing with.
Yeah.
And so still the top 3 have some adversity in their life. Like,
Yeah,
that's how ridiculous this game is.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is like you say that they all faced adversity while also, Bazana shows up and is West Coast League Player of the Year as an incoming freshman.
Yep.
Burns has to transfer, has to deal with that, but also is
through
like
100.
Through 100. Condon he sits has like incredibly loud, bat speed and power. Like, so that's that with
And all 3 focused on getting their skills better.
right.
Bazana, Burns had to throw more strikes and develop better slider, and Condon went to UGA, and obviously we know the UGA guys at that time really well, and hit a ton of their hit tracks and had to get better to play
Sure.
on that field. So it's like they are all elite and still had to get better at the thing they're elite at.
Yeah.
It wasn't even just like, oh, Condon's not a dog, he doesn't like to play the game. That's not true for everything I've heard. That he loves baseball, but it's like, dude, no matter how good he was going as a freshman, and he was damn good and better than almost anyone listening to this podcast, he still wasn't good enough to play for UGA. That's
right.
how nuts it is,
Yeah.
Like, that's how crazy it is,
the challenge is that like it's extremely likely to get worse.
Yep.
Like it's
yeah.
not
Yeah, and this
it's
is
not
as good
likely,
as it's gonna get.
Yeah, it's not likely to be like
well,
to
no
get
more
a lot
Australians
better.
now. Bazana's the last guy. Actually,
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So it's just like like God forbid, like Rintaro Sasaki becomes like really good, charts a path for.
It's already bad enough
for another for like another country. It's just like so like there's so much more competition that's about to be like fleshed into the game, and to give
Wake Forest Friday starter Shohei Ohtani. Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
just
right,
like
imagine
that.
Yeah, but that that could easily
Well,
easily
yeah,
be a
of
thing.
course.
I mean, he was at one point in high school like very much considering skipping the NPB draft and just coming like doing that exact
right.
thing.
And he wasn't even the best player. And that's the scary thing.
That's right.
We
That's
had
right.
it's,
Fujinami.
Fujinami. Imagine Fujinami pitching on Fridays for North Carolina.
Yeah, right.
It's absurd.
So it's it's challenging, but it does mean that like part of you should play. I think to bring it like all the way back, the true antidote is not like, oh, it's going to be impossible, like don't do it.
Right.
The antidote is like it's going to be hard, you better love it. And also, like, it's not hard if you like doing the work. If the work, like, excites you and you're like, you know what I do actually like doing? I like, going into train. I like being able to, like, go into the hit tracks on campus and, like, be able to take swings. And, like, that's the kind of I like to see my progress. Like, that kind of stuff matters. You do have to, it's a trope, but it's like you do have to love the process of getting better. And then there's another component, which is like, you have to have some sense of like that what you're doing is gonna show up on the field when it matters, because like you will need game reps. There's no, even though people like to say it as some sort of like boogeyman or whatever, there's no single athlete who has likely existed who was just like built inside of a lab, completely away from playing any games, then shows up and like dominates the sport. Like that's not a thing. You have to have some exposure to both elements of the thing because otherwise you can't really express your tools very well.
Yeah, and even some of the minor exceptions I can think of, that like built in a lab, trained a ton, played high school baseball, didn't play on a select team, played on a high school, played like, please play in the select event, showed up, diced, got a million college offers. And even in that case, that's one of the most competitive people I've ever met.
Who's that?
He's a mutual friend. We'll just keep it
sure.
that, But just like, he showed, and he's just like, but he already, it's not like the game reps is like, you need to learn how to be competitive. But this person was competitive, like ultra competitive in chess games, like he hates to lose.
Sure.
So a lot of that you learn by playing baseball. This person already had it from being a psycho in other areas, So it's like, even the areas where I can think of, it's like they were already really good at games generally.
And listen to what you said. It's just like trained a ton and played on their high school baseball team.
Yeah, it's not like they didn't play
and
any
was
games.
like an elite competitor.
Yeah, it's not like they didn't play any games.
So it's just like,
but they just didn't do the select baseball thing.
For sure. I'm not saying that you have to do the
No.
baseball
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. But even in the minor exceptions I can think of, it's still not even qualifying.
For sure.
You got to learn to be competitive.
You have to have some exposure to the sport.
Yeah.
So one of the topics that we get frequently is, questions to me, questions to you that are some version of how do I work in baseball? I love the sport. I played the sport, whatever. I want to work in baseball. I want to work at your company. I want to work for the, whatever, the Detroit Tigers. I want to work for, these storied franchises that I grew up with.
A lot of questions about the Tigers. That is true.
A
lot of people want to work for the Detroit Tigers. Yeah.
The word's getting out. No, but just like, the people want to work in baseball just like anywhere. So what is your advice as the landscape has shifted a bit? Because the jobs that used to be available, like the way in the door, like 10 years ago, is not the way in the door now. And just to paint the picture, like when I was a younger man as a college graduate, when Kyle was too, like the way in the door was like you go buy a cheap suit from, the Men's Warehouse, you hang out around the elevators at the winter meetings, you take a ton of meetings, you shove your resume into a bunch of people's faces. Like that was one of the mechanisms of just like showing up to the winter meetings, trying to network like crazy, and trying to hook on as like data ops, nobody, and somewhere, and then just sort of like work your way up. There's always been jobs for people who have played the game at a high level.
Yeah.
Like that's always the easiest way in is like, I won 3 Cy Youngs. It's like, all right, you can come to spring training.
Yeah.
You
can be an area scout.
That's right.
You can make 38,000.
That's right. You can come. But if you don't have that experience, like if your college or if your playing experience ends at college or ends in high school, like, the way in the door has shifted, I think, quite a bit. And I'm curious, like what you would advise a recent graduate to be thinking about.
Like 20 years ago, you would sell tickets. You'd be like the ticket guy. That's how Theo Epstein got his start. Right?
Yeah. That's interesting because like a lot of the jobs are like, you'd sell tickets or you just like, be on the grounds crew or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, that guy's on the grounds crew. He should, I saw him do math.
Yeah. What do you know about the Rule 5 draft?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's put him on the thing that no one cares about. Yeah, the winter meetings. You're very men's warehouse. Very Brooks Brothers-esque.
Brooks
focused
Brothers.
guy.
What you made of money?
These guys, I don't know.
That's
suit
true.
still looks terrible. So what's the difference? It's changed a lot. Obviously, the internships at Driveline, Triad Athletics, many of these other places is still one of the best places to start. Of course, that belies the question: how do you get those jobs? And it's still this misconception. When I was younger, it still exists. I'm going to work harder than everybody else, and that's how I'm going to prove it. And I'll work for free. It's there are probably some businesses that take that free labor and abuse it or whatever, but we're not one of them. Whether there's a moral stance to it or not, I mean, it's just people. It's not that easy to actually manage unpaid people and whatever. It's not attractive, to us.
Yeah,
it's
not even attractive to teams. To
anybody.
I'll work for free, and it's like.
Okay, but that's not a big deal.
Yeah, guys are like, oh, I can't believe this guy's not trying hard in a minor league game. I would do that for free. And it's like, you're not qualified to do it for free.
Exactly. So that's not the greatest calling card. There has to be a documented evidence that that you have to love baseball and you have to have done it. So people are like, oh, well, I got a college degree. I know how to use XGBoost and R and Python, and I know how to do these things. I passed these classes. All right, well, what have you done with the Open Biomechanics data set? What have you done with StatCast, Open Data, Baseball Savant, whatever, college play-by-play like Robert Frey puts out, those things. Well, nothing, but I could do it. It's like, oh, dude, next, there's I got 100 applications of people that have transformed the Open Biomechanics data set from something as simple to an animation to calculating joint torques in a different way. So this isn't oh, we want free labor or anything like that. It's no, it's what it is that if you really enjoy this stuff, you would have done it. You've demonstrated it. And to correct the record, I am not a college graduate. Mike, slandered me and said I was one.
I did?
Yeah. When I was a younger college graduate, like Kyle was, I was it's not. I'm a two-time dropout.
You were of the age when people would have hypothetically.
Two-time dropout. Not only that, I got a head start in college. I was in college when I was 16. I still didn't graduate. That's impressive.
There you go.
But it's so, as you could probably tell, I don't focus that much on people that their college education. What I focus mostly on, and I know you do too, is what is the demonstrated love for the game? What is the demonstrated love? What have they done? Increasingly, you and I are prioritizing previous coaching experience. Because it's one thing to be someone in Python or Excel and transform these things, whether it's business data to baseball biomechanical data to coaching data. But if you've never met the enemy on the field, it's just not that interesting to us. Being able to coach Little League and be like, oh, this is how you deal with parents, running a practice. The very realities and the logistics of does your theory actually meet when you meet the enemy on the battlefield. And playing definitely helps. There's no doubt about it. But actually coaching and being responsible for the wins and losses, I think is for me, it's a pretty big draw. And I don't care what level you did it at. I don't at all. So if you coach Little League, high school, whatever, you understand what it is to be. To call those shots and how hard it is. So for me, it's you have that experience, and do that, volunteer in the summers, coach your Little League teams. It's good for the game of baseball. So I think that's important too. And then have documented work on GitHub and a website. It's like that. I think those are the things that I look at.
I think the coaching thing is interesting because it solves a lot of the problems that come with hiring your bone stock I read/wrote for Fangraphs applicant, which is it solves for a couple things. One, overwhelmingly, when you got to think forward a little bit, overwhelmingly, if you are hired as a junior person into one of these teams, or you're trying to think through that, the most common failure point that the person hiring you has seen is that you can't talk to anybody. So the role where you have to talk to people and lead them and get them to do absolutely anything is some kind of coaching.
Yep.
And it's also generally freely available.
Oh yeah.
Plenty. Just go to your local high school team, ask them if they want an assistant coach for free. They're probably pretty likely to say yes.
Yeah.
And if they don't say yes, I would be shocked if you did it 5 times and got rejected 5 times.
Yeah.
Little
leagues, pony leagues, select ball.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Or volunteer to be a little league coach, or volunteer to be whatever. the point is that there's such a thirst for just enthusiastic coaches that if you do truly love it enough to want to make it your profession, because let's be clear, if you're extremely smart and are deciding like, I want to get into baseball to like, maximize my wealth or whatever, like that's stupid.
Yeah.
Like
one of those two has to be wrong.
That's right.
Or both.
That's right.
But not zero.
That's right. So it's just like, look, like, you want to get into baseball because you love being around baseball. Like that's the only real reason to work in the sport. Well, I guess there's another one, which is that you literally cannot do anything else. But if you're trying to figure out, if you're trying to figure out like, how do I break into the game? You're not usually of the skill set who's like, I can't, like the only thing I can do is coach baseball players.
Right. Yeah. Usually that comes out a lot earlier.
Yeah. So, so the main thing is like, go find a coaching job because it starts to demonstrate, one, that you do love the sport, two, that you have some feel for leadership or communication or whatever, because like, well, you might think like, what is like coaching a bunch of like JV high school kids have to do with me being able to be a successful junior analyst at the complex? Everything, like nearly everything. Yeah. Like if you approach it from a skill development standpoint, every conversation that you're having with your players has some carry-on applicability to being able to interface with like athletes or your coworkers. And it's not because what I'm not saying is like, oh, they're like equivalent intellects or whatever. No. It's just that that you have to have some ability to manipulate your message to make yourself understood in a way that works. And like, that's what it looks like to successfully lead and influence. Whether you start that with, 15-year-old high school kids or whatever. The point is like, those are the jobs that are readily available. Take them, learn how to use them. The second reason to take a coaching job is that it's a really good data set with which to demonstrate additional and extra value, whatever that is. Like if you're coaching and you want to get into, being a video intern or whatever, great. Clip the hell out of every JV kid's, at bats and all this stuff. Like do that work, put together good video packages. One, that's a great way to earn influence with the kids that you're coaching. But then number two is like, you can just show that when you go to interview, like, okay, I'm interested in a track in like, the data science department or the analytics department. Great. Run all your game changer stuff through some sort of stuff and start playing around with that, with that sort of data set or the underlying data set. We collected blast on everybody and here's how it relates to WRC plus or whatever at the, JV high school level. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, is that some world-breaking analysis? No. But is someone who sees a bunch of Men's Warehouse suits every day
here we go
gonna be excited by Men's someone who's like,
slander.
Here's this weird thing that I did and like clearly invested a lot of time and energy and passion into it? Yes, it will definitely it'll definitely get you to whatever the next stage of that thing is. And then you're going to be make or break on just like, can you look a person in the eye, shake their hand, like rub 3 words together in an interview? Like those things will be like ultimate separators, but it is one of the clear ways to just like get your foot in the door, which is like, go do the work somewhere else as if you had the job, and then use that as work product into the other thing. Now, is that a lot more work? Definitely. But you said you love baseball, you said you wanted to do it. So like, it's not like that's going to be more work than what you're going to be asked to do as a junior level, bebop, like baseball ops intern. That's going to be far less, but you will have done it on your own initiative. And this will be like incredibly exciting to people because it will show like, oh, this person like has enthusiasm, has passion, and is extremely likely to carry that over into working for our organization, whether that's an MLB team or like one of these player development spots. And, as opposed to just being like, hire me because I'll definitely learn how to have, gumption when I get there.
Right.
And it's like,
and coaching the
I doubt
team, coaching A-ball, like the game is, the teams don't pay you to coach the team. Like they don't, about the 4 hours, the 3.5 hours they're on the game. Like we would all do it for free, and we have done it for free. Like the coaching in the game, that's the fun part.
Sure.
You're by definition don't do much then. It's the 40 hours a week besides that you get paid for.
The practices.
And if you're college or high school or little league or whatever, edge the field, mow it, line it, all those other things. And it's a fast way to gain a lot of respect with the old school too, is to just know how to do those things.
No doubt.
I remember Brian Conger and I were standing outside, just coached. I got the field 7 a.m. We're there all day. Had dinner at 6, whatever. And I said, hey, I need you to do something with the outside. We need to stick around late. He said, all right, yeah. I coordinated with the Reds at the time. We took all the light stands out, the cages, setting sun in Goodyear, Arizona, and we're just spray painting all these light stands with truck bed liner spray, and to reduce the electric shocks that would reset our motion capture cameras. And Conger, we talked an hour and a half, and then we got back in. And then came back the next morning. And then years later, I had dinner with Conger in Arizona, and he said, that's, what I think about when I think about us working together for the 1 year. He's like, one of my most memories. I was like, I can't imagine there's so many ridiculous things. He's like, think about that. He told me this. I was like, that's what you remember? Painting those things with bed liner spray I bought at Home Depot that day? He's like, yeah, you know why? Because, why are we doing this? This is the job of at least 2 other departments that aren't ours.
Sure.
And no one's going to do it unless we do it. He's like, and I thought that was awesome. He's like, I think a lot about it all the time. He's like, that's what servant leadership is, doing those things. And sure enough, doing those things, you gain a respect of the front office. And someone's going to catch you in the act of doing something like that one day. Someone's going to catch you doing that. And they're going to be like, what are you doing? I'm doing this. Well, why? Because whatever, and so forth.
Because I saw it needed to be done.
That's how Elmer descends. I'll talk about him all the time while he stood out. This guy, he doesn't know me anything. Played 13, 15 years in the show, no injuries. Crazy amateur career out of Mexico. You want to talk about real adversity? I mean, this guy he's a dog. And then was coaching with the Reds forever, and I just asked him, hey, can you help run this biomech lab and whatever? It's like, why would he say yes to that? It's insane. Why would Elmer do that? He could just we should just quit and do something else. Should have listened to me, but he did, because he believed, whether he believed in the data or not. I'm not saying he didn't. But he believed that, in my vision, he believed that this would help the kids, and he did a great job communicating with the Latin players, the Mexican. We had a lot of Mexican players too, communicating with Mexicans and showing them, hey, this is why it's valuable, or this is why I think it's valuable, And it's like, man, that's such great leadership quality. It goes both ways, right? He was able to earn a lot of respect from my ends, and then I hopefully earned Elmer's respect by showing him how much I cared about the players and how much I felt it was important that we had Latin influence and that we had Spanish translation and that we had these things. And I hope I earned his trust that way. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And coaching and showing up and doing things that aren't expected, at least at Driveline for sure is the fastest way. But I know it's almost, I don't want to say it's more, but it almost is more in pro ball if you're caught doing these other things that are above and beyond. It's such a fast way for these people to be, oh, he's a baseball outsider. I already have my preconceived notions of this guy. But I was able to earn the respect of some old school people with the Reds when I did things that were above and beyond, or kind of defied their expectations. And then that's the fastest way to be all right, this kid's got, all right, maybe I was wrong about this, that, or the other. And maybe he really does have dog in him, and give you a chance, So coaching is the ultimate way to do it, because it just sucks. It's terrible. And groundskeeping and all that. So that's what I look for. I know that's what you look for. Also, did this person work at McDonald's? Did they work a series of bad, terrible jobs? I look for that too. And a lot of people don't put it on their resume because, I wouldn't put the fact that I was a pizza server. I wouldn't put that on my resume because not that I may be embarrassed or how it's taken, but I always ask. So I don't judge anyone for not putting it on their resume, because totally understandable that they would think that that's not interesting. But I ask, and I always find it very interesting, because what you learn about at McDonald's in your own small way is imagine this operation times 40,000 of them with in all countries, tax laws, suppliers, food standards. You know how hard that is? You know how much of a minor miracle it is to do that? I mean, McDonald's is one of the greatest like operations ever. True, like by operation standards, truly. You know, and then you and I met my uncle who worked at it, and the what they do and the demanding and how they communicate and how nice they are, but like respectful, but also very demanding at the same time. That was really cool to see, you know. And in your own small way, while you're working the fryer or doing whatever, like I've done, it's like you get an appreciation for it, I think. So I look for that a lot too. Can you take instruction? Not can you just lead these kids, but can you take instruction from a job that you may not totally believe in, but like you do learn quite a bit there. So work experience, there's no substitute for it, and there's no such thing as non-applicable work experience, at least in my opinion. Yeah,
and I think the last thing to think about is like, you know, number one, it's a commodity to want to work in baseball. Like there's plenty, like you just go to a random collegiate baseball team, you're like, hey, how many of you guys want to work in baseball? Like get half the hands go up. Right. It's like, okay, so you know that's not special. Like, not that it's not your dream, but it's not like a unique dream. Right. So you got to find some ways to set yourself apart. One of which is like, can you have feel? Can you communicate? You know, like that's what the value of the coaching stuff is. And the other is like, you have to develop your own carrying tool. Like if you think about it in playing terms, like players that get to the big leagues are big leaguers because they do at least one thing at a special level.
Yep.
What's your special level? Like, oh, I want to be the GM of a baseball team. Great. There's 30 of those people on earth. Like, they're all uniquely talented at something.
Half of them played in the big leagues too. It ain't getting any easier.
That's right.
You know?
So like, but they're all uniquely talented in something. They have something, and it's always not a loud individual tool all the time. Sometimes it's a unique combination of a lot of these things where it's like, holy shit, that person's actually above average at like this and this, and also this over here. Like, wow.
And it's usually not correlated with the others.
Right. It's like, wow, okay, interesting. So I'm not saying that you have to go like that. It's going to be valuable for you to be like the world's greatest cellist and then like submit that application to the Tampa Bay Rays. But what I am saying is that like you have to think through like what is the thing that you're actually special at that could in some way deliver value to the front office or to the big league team.
Yeah, how do you stand out?
How do you stand out? You know, and
speak Spanish.
Speak Spanish.
Oh yeah, best advice I got from Kevin Goldstein that I never followed.
For sure, being able to have that in your back pocket is certainly valuable. But like if you aren't a native speaker, then that's just another one of those like combinatorial like, you know, skill profiles to be like, okay, passable Spanish speaker, you know, this. Okay, all of a sudden that's starting to shape up to something. But like, that's where you have to figure out, like, am I just like the fifth best person at biomechanics analysis, like on planet Earth? Or am I this completely unique set of skills and experiences where I'm just like a pretty solid generalist, but I also like know a lot about international scouting or something. The only way to really do that is like, then you have to start thinking about constructing a career as like a series of stops along the way to the point where you can, you know, make a lot of progress into these like the higher levels of the sport. But if you're going to do that, like, so maybe it's your Spanish speaking plus you coached, you know, this other thing, plus you know a person that gets you the entry level job. Great. How does that build another skill for you to layer into getting another job somewhere else in the organization? Like, okay, I want to get into scouting for a couple of years because XYZ reasons. Great. Okay, while I'm doing that, I need to build up like some basic level of R or Python or something to be able to like not completely fall down when I'm talking to the data scientists, BB ops people. And maybe they aren't great communicators, so I can help translate what they're saying to the other people that are over here in my group. Okay, that makes you valuable. Like it's part of like combining these skills into different things that ultimately can propel your career. But the challenge doing it that way is like it just takes a long time. Like it takes a long time to develop the skills and the relationships. And because it takes a long time and because the pay at those lower levels is like, you're going to be a really smart person whose peers are like lapping you by like
3-4x. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Just by insane amounts. And like, if you gotta really love it, like there's quite a number of people who are just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going into, medical device sales or whatever. And it's like, that's no knock. It's just like that is the lived reality of just being like, I am literally too smart to be 7 years into my career making not nearly as much money as I should be making and still having to like grind it out on these like insane road trips or do whatever. Like you really have to love the sport and love it at a level that sustains like that. And then if you layer in family dynamics where it's like, oh, like I love it enough to do that on my own and also be away from spouse, kids, family, like whatever that support structure is, like then it really just becomes like, it is a grind to overuse a phrase.
Yes.
So
all right.
if you can sign yourself up for that level of pain tolerance, and you can develop a few carrying tools, like you probably can develop a long career inside of the sport of baseball.
Yeah. Carve out a nice niche that no one's going for.
That's right.
Like if it all went away in Driveline and people forgot, I would still be a dominant Rule 5 analyst. And that's how I would get my job. That's how I would get my.
That's right.
Person.
Everybody,
I take great pride in it.
Everybody always says.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah, but I take great pride in it, and the teams they love it. It just doesn't pay well, and it's thankless work, but it is a way in for sure.